Good afternoon. Good afternoon to each of you, and thank you so much for joining us. I am Chanel Sidbury, Executive Director of K-12 Curriculum and Instruction, and this is week 2 of our Black History Month series. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce to you a couple of members of my team. Melissa Perez, who's the Cultural and Linguistic Specialist, Development Specialist for DPS, and also Miss Kelly Stevens, which is also manning our chat on YouTube Live. We apologize for the delay in start. We had some technical difficulties, but hope that you are joining us live today. If not, this recording will also be available on the Durham Public Schools YouTube channel for you to view asynchronously whenever you have time. So I'm going to toss it over to Melissa, who is going to talk to us about our DPS Celebrates websites and all that we're going to be talking about. Melissa?
Thank you, Chanel. Good afternoon, everyone. So glad you could join us and be here. I'm honored to be here to share with you this afternoon. I would like to introduce to you to our focus on this month for our DPS Celebrates website and project, which is our initiative throughout the district for district celebrations each month. On our website, which is celebrate.dpsnc.net, you will find each month different district-wide celebrations. This month for February, of course, we are focusing on Black History Month, and we are also focusing on National Freedom Day, as well as having our character trait of the month with the spotlight on integrity, as well as National School Counseling Week. On our website, which is available in English and Spanish, you will find all of these items listed here. We have many resources to educational items to be able to use in the classroom with teachers and students and families. We also have available Zoom backgrounds, Bitmoji backgrounds, as well as a monthly calendar for events and to highlight awareness for all of our monthly celebrations. Feel free to go to celebrate.dpsnc.net to check out these resources and join us in our district celebrations each month. We also will be promoting these items on our Durham Public Schools social media pages, so you can follow along there for more information as well. Now I would like to toss it back to Ms. Chanel Sidbury, Executive Director of Curriculum and Instruction.
Thank you. So as we mentioned, we are celebrating this month, Black History Month, but we celebrate all cultural and diversities here in Durham Public Schools. Our children and families are the fabric of our district, and we want to make sure that every child and every family sees themselves in educational resources and materials that they are forego with Durham Public Schools. So Black History Month, or National African American History Month, is an annual celebration of achievements by Black Americans and is a time for recognizing the central role of African Americans in the U.S. history. The event grew out of Negro History Week, and the brainchild that was Carter G. Woodson and other prominent African Americans. We want to make sure that we celebrate February as Black History Month, knowing that countries all over the world, including Canada and the United Kingdom, also devote a month to celebrating Black history. It is important that we celebrate diversity and also make sure that we have representation of otherwise underrepresented cultures and students. Next slide. So why at DPS are we going beyond 28 days? So we won't just celebrate in February. We're going to go beyond that. And that is because Black history cannot be contained in 28 days. So if you use the hashtag DPS Celebrates, you will be able to look around, see what celebrations, see in other ways how people are engaging, how we've engaged in the past around this event, and make sure that you adhere to our upcoming events in both February and March. We have a tremendous history in Durham, so you're going to be hearing from a lot of Durham folks that are going to be coming to you over the coming weeks, but we want to make sure that we provide culturally diverse perspectives, and it is our commitment to be inclusive and to make sure that all of our students get this discussion, get this attention, and feel represented all year long and not just in February.
This afternoon, I would like to take this opportunity to share with you who our guests are going to be. We have Dr. Bullock, who are going to share with us this afternoon, and it's exciting to have them here because Dr. Kelvin Bullock and Dr. Rhonda Bullock are DPS's own. They started out their educational career here as teachers at Hillside High School. And you'll see that, unfortunately, they're not able to be here with us live, but they did pre-record for us a video that we are going to watch. And you will hear them give a shout out to our Hillside Hornets in that video. Currently, Dr. Kelvin Bullock is the Executive Director of Equity Affairs for Durham Public Schools. And his wife, Dr. Rhonda Bullock, is the lead curator for the organization called We Are that works to extend anti-racist education among all stakeholders. We are excited for this opportunity, excited to hear you see their lovely family here. They have 2 children, and they're going to talk to you today about something that they are very passionate about, which is Black history here in Durham.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Daniel Kelvin Bullock, and I'm the Executive Director for Equity Affairs for Durham Public Schools. And I'm so excited about this conversation we're going to have today for Black History Month. I am joined by my better half, my beautiful wife, Dr.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Rhonda Taylor Bullock, and I am the co-founder and lead curator at We Are.
All right, so for those that don't know, Rhonda and I actually started our educational career here in Durham, teaching at Hillside High School. Shout out to the Hornets. And so today we're just going to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing. Rhonda's going to tell you more about We Are, and we're also going to jump into some of the significant figures that we admire in Black history and speak a little bit about the current state of Black history and our dreams for Black history here in Durham. So with that being said, we're going to jump right into our questions. Rhonda, my first question for you is, tell us a little bit more about We Are and the purpose, why you started it, why you founded it. Just tell us a little bit.
Okay,
Black history.
so We Are is a nonprofit organization, and We Are stands for Working to Extend Anti-Racist Education. At We Are, we provide anti-racism trainings for children, families, and educators. We use a 3-pronged approach to dismantle systemic racism in education and beyond by offering summer camps for kids in rising 1st through 5th grade, professional development for educators, and workshops for parents and families. And you know, I wanted to start an organization that does anti-racism work, primarily for one, because I felt like I was called to do this work, but 2, because at the time, this is around fall 2014, spring 2015, our country was going through much of the current social unrest that we're going through right now. It's a lot of racism. The Black Lives Matter movement was just starting. George Zimmerman had been acquitted of murdering Trayvon Martin, and it was a lot going on. And then I personally was just sitting with, you know, what does all this mean for me? What is my contribution? What am I being called and led to do during this time? And I was having my own racist encounters, re-entering UNC Chapel Hill as a PhD student, and just feeling like I need to be doing something more. And so the idea for We Are came to me. I started drafting it out. I came to you and shared some of my ideas, and you helped me to further develop them. And I just wanted to create I don't think I knew it was going to be an organization, but I just wanted to create this space where there was these intentional efforts to do systemic change and to disrupt systemic racism.
Yeah, and thinking about that and kind of reflecting on where you were, I think I want to highlight or just name the fact that you, in that year, like you're saying, 2014, 2015, you're going to grad school as a professional Black woman, and you are dealing face to face with racism as a PhD student, but as an educator also. Mm-hmm. And so all of these experiences just led you to create an organization, which I think is phenomenal, because many times we, Black people in particular, have had these experiences but it's amazing to see that you were able to take those tough experiences, those experiences that you shouldn't have had, but mold them into something that's creating change for people on such a large scale. And we see that a lot with figures in Black history, people who are able to take the troubling experiences that we have as a people, but use them as fuel to create something better, not only for themselves, but for others. With that in mind, and I'll just say a little bit about the Office of Equity Affairs. People who are in Durham Public Schools, I'm sure you're familiar with the office. We've had a number of trainings on implicit bias, microaggressions, culturally responsive teaching, thinking about ways that we can go about providing a better educational experience, particularly for students of color, and for this month wanting to center the experiences of our Black children. But going back to, taking those experiences and using those as fuel to create something better for yourself and for others, who is a significant figure for you in Black history that, when this time of the year comes around, or even during the year, you like to highlight or celebrate? So who would that be for you?
I mean, there are so many different options of Black figures who were inspirational. Some, everyday figures and local heroes, to some that are much more well known. And for me, one Black figure that left, a strong impression on me was Fannie Lou Hamer. And so I can remember being an undergrad at UNC and taking an African American Studies class. And I read the book For Freedom's Sake, and it was Fannie Lou Hamer's biography, and it was just opened my eyes up to who she was as a Black woman in the Delta, fighting for voting rights, and just some of the treatment that she endured, being brutally attacked by grown men, by police officers, and to be more specific, by white police officers. And she never relenting, never giving up. She coined the phrase sick and tired of being sick and tired. And, I saw something in her and that resonated with me. And she's just been one of a key figure in my walk in doing activism work.
Yeah, kind of on that note, and thinking about the civil rights movement, I almost hate to say, I'll go back to when I was a little younger. When I was in middle school, one of the first people that, or a person I specifically remember researching and doing a presentation on was Malcolm X. And really learning his story, understanding where he came from, and for him to rise to prominence as a leader, really challenging us to think about issues of systemic racism and the plight of Black people in this country. Just to hear some of the speeches that he made and the way he pushed us and challenged us. And honestly, when it came to Malcolm X, I was also kind of, there was a hip hop music had an affinity for Malcolm X that resonated with me also. So there was that aspect. And then, more generally speaking, Martin Luther King, and when people really analyze, get beyond just the I Have a Dream speech and really analyze Martin Luther King and understanding, he was really pushing the envelope with what he was doing, during that time period. But it sometimes gets whitewashed, and we don't really understand, this man was doing some things and saying some things. In retrospect, people talk about how much they love him, but to be that voice now, I could imagine he probably has some enemies now too, because of how he was pushing things.
Oh yeah, and he clearly had enemies back then, right? We kind of sanitize and just pull out the I Have a Dream and forget about all of the context surrounding even what he was saying in that moment and even in that particular speech.
Yeah, so one of my favorite quotes from him is that life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? And I feel like that not only resonates with me, but it resonates with educators as a whole, because as an educator, you have to be focused and thoughtful about how the work that you do impacts the lives of the students that you work with. Speaking of getting specifically to teachers and educators, we know that last week the North Carolina State Board of Education passed the new social studies standards across our state. So for those that don't know, these new standards will include terms like racism, discrimination, identity, just challenging people to, and students will start to learn about some of the systemic injustices that have occurred in society as a whole, and in different systems. So with that, now we know that there are teachers that have been teaching about these things for years. So,
Right.
so in some classrooms, this will not be new content. For other classrooms, it may be some new subject area to cover. So with that, I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts about incorporating terminology like race, racism, discrimination, or issues relating to Black history into standards and into curriculum? And what does that look like?
I will say it's about time, to be honest, particularly since systemic racism plays such an integral part in who our country is. And racism, I'm a critical race scholar. And so in critical race theory, we believe and talk about and research how racism is systemic and endemic in our society. And it makes sense that using that type of language that is indicative of the society that we live in, that it should be a part of our educational system, and so that students can understand it, critique it, and use it to make sense of the world that we currently live in. And so I know there was debates over the standards or whatnot and whether or not to include systemic racism versus racism. And I will say that, at least to me, it is a victory that we at least got, oppression, discrimination, identity, racism in the standards. And I think it just opens the door and the hope for being able to, again, tell a more truthful, more holistic story about our history. And also the new standards will be much more inclusive. So by inclusive, what I mean is that people from marginalized communities, predominantly Black, Brown, Indigenous, people of color, will be included in our curriculum in ways that we were not included previously. And that will be a much more realistic representation of our country, right? Because we're here, we're a part of it, and we should not be marginal. People of color have been very much integral to the United States history. And I think it's great that these conversations will now be a part of this larger context and will help children to develop critical thinking skills as it relates to trying to process and make sense of this world that we're currently living in.
Yeah, and as a former history teacher, one of the quotes that we often use is that if you don't know your history, you're bound to repeat it. And so with that, we want to be thoughtful about, learning the positive things, the ideals that are highlighted in historical documents, but also understanding the contradictions that often happen between the ideal and people's reality. And, and just thinking about issues of race, racism, and education, I often go back to the fact that, as we think about education, we have to remember in our country, it was once illegal for Black people to learn to read and write. Mm-hmm. And so just thinking about that, like the fact that, like, there are these debates about whether or not we should acknowledge race, or the role that race has played in history, or the role that racism has played in history. I mean, there is a history of opportunities being denied to people just based on their skin color, and also experiences in history where, when people have been able to achieve in the African American race, that there's been resistance to that and having to navigate that. So, we need to know this history. We need to know that a lot of what we see today, as far as the social turmoil, a lot of the conflicts we're seeing, the protests we're seeing, there's history that helps people to understand what's going on. There's a reason that we continue to see these conflicts. And so I hope that the more we can understand that history, we can move forward to create a better democracy, a better society. But we gotta know the history. We gotta know why Black people specifically are so upset about some things. It's because things happen and there's a pattern, and these things keep happening, and then people don't want to acknowledge it, don't want to make changes, don't want to do anything about it. But that repetitive nature of it shows you that it's systemic. Yeah. So we have to do something to interrupt it. And learning, knowledge is power. Knowledge is a good starting point to create change.
Yeah, I think if we had a more holistic understanding of our country's, racist behaviors and how white supremacy has been upheld, it would make explaining the events that happened January 6th much easier, because now you have some terminology and some context and some actual patterns in history of where those types of insurrections have happened, and how white supremacy has shown up, because it wasn't an isolated incident. And I think introducing language will help us to better make sense, process, and analyze those events. And I just want to, just talk about the phrase, if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. That also implies that your history was dooming. They're like, and so, because there's some parts of history that you would want to repeat and learn about because it was enjoyable. And just thinking about, Black people before they were kidnapped and brought over from the coast of Africa were living a different kind of life, right? And before they were enslaved, they were living a different kind of life. Like, to learn that history, might want to repeat it. But in this country, and I don't know how widespread that, that cliche is, but it is definitely telling that to learn your, if you don't learn your history, you're doomed to repeat it. And that just means that history was dooming. Yeah. Right? And so I feel like the new standards will help us to better understand that phrase. Yeah.
And so I'm with you. So this fear, people, a lot of times when we use that terminology, we're thinking about all the negative things, and people are resistant to acknowledging that stuff. But there's some positive things to draw on too. But we need to talk about the bad stuff so that we don't repeat that. But also, there are so many affirming things in Black history too, right, that we need to go back and draw upon, and that can really help us as a society today in affirming Black children, in affirming Black people, and also reinforcing, helping us to overcome sometimes the negative thoughts, stereotypes, or biases that we have towards people of color because we don't know that history. And I think everybody needs to know that Black history. So.
Right. I mean, that makes me think about Gholdy Muhammad's book, Cultivating Genius, where she talks about Black literary societies and the role that Black literary societies played in educating the Black community, and just the emphasis on a communal learning. And it wasn't very individual. It wasn't competitive. It was mixed ability, mixed age spaces, where, everybody depended on one another to learn. And the older generations had something to teach younger generations, and younger generations had something to teach older generations. And it wasn't like this unidirectional way of learning. And it was much more communal, and we were responsible for each other's learning. And so that's the type of history that we need to know and stand on the work of our ancestors, to kind of pull in, that knowledge and the work that they already did, and then figure out how can we, implement that into our educational systems today.
All right. Yeah, that's a plug right there. We do have a book study coming up on Cultivating Genius later in the semester. So stay tuned for that from the Office of Equity Affairs and in collaboration with We Are. Now, to kind of wrap us up, we're parents of Black children in DPS. Shout out to Spring Valley. So, as a parent of Black children, what is your dream for Black history in Durham? And that's a kind of vague question. You could go in different directions with it, but what is your dream for Black history in Durham?
Yeah, and I also say shout out to Zion and Zaire.
Oh yeah.
Our kids. My dream, I have many dreams, but I won't go into all of them right now. But one of them is that, Black history becomes integrated, that it doesn't, like, I think we need a Black History Month because we need that level of intentionality. And, at this time where it's like this collective celebration, this collective learning. But I also think Black history should be integrated throughout the curriculum because Black history is American history, right? And so it should be embedded in the social studies curriculum. It should be embedded in science and in math and in English. So oftentimes people talk about Black history just to be integrated in social studies courses, but no, it should be in English. It should be in science. It should be in math. It should be in all of them. As other marginalized communities should be represented as well, because we've made contributions in those areas. And I think it will be important for all students, but particularly Black students, to see themselves in those multifaceted ways, right? Not just in athletics or not just in the arts, which are important, right? And that we should be represented there too, but it should be integral, right? And that's what I'm hoping that as the social studies standards now at the state level are setting a precedent, I'm ready for the other subject areas to come on in the room, and do their part as well, because it shouldn't just be in social studies, right? It should be in all the subject areas.
Yeah, and I would say, my dream for Black history is very similar. I'm totally with you. Like it needs to be integrated in different areas. Black people, Black children need to be affirmed, and not only in social studies, but in other subject areas. And we need to think about representation of different groups across the board, not necessarily, like you said, not just the social studies classroom, but the math classroom, the science classroom, etc. So I'm with you. That is definitely my dream also. And also just thinking about Durham, there is so much rich history here in Durham.
Right.
So my dream is also that, our community, our young people in particular, they get the opportunities to learn about just the deep history and the progress and all the things that have been done in Durham historically, unique to the Black community and Black people. So that's kind of where I am too. And so it's beautiful to have these dreams. I'm really excited about where Durham goes from here, particularly as we think about empowering young people and empowering the next generations. And actually on that note, as we wrap up, if you don't know, next week, we're going to be highlighting actually one of Dr. Taylor Bullock's former students the next couple of weeks. So she has a student that has written a children's book. She has another student that illustrated the children's book, and that same student has helped to put together a mural commemorating Black history in Durham. So make sure you check in, tune in for the next few weeks as
That's
we continue.
Jasmine Stewart and Marcus Boone, so we won't say their names.
All right, yeah. So
also shout out to Hillside because they were Hillside graduates.
Yeah. So definitely be sure to check back in. We may have a few more comments to share their photos to after this, to acknowledge the work that they'll be talking about over the next few weeks. And then just stick with us, not only for February, but we're celebrating Black history right on through March also. So
April, May, June, July.
Yeah. So it's hashtag DPS Beyond28. So make sure you stick with us and enjoy the different programs, the different speakers that we have. So I think that's it for us.
That's it. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us, and we will see y'all next time. Have a good one.
We'd like to give a shout out and a big thank you to Dr. Kelvin Bullock and Dr. Rhonda Bullock again for sharing with us today. And as they mentioned toward the end of their video about our upcoming guests, next week, we have a list of them for you here. Next week, we have Miss Jasmine Stewart, who is a Durham Public Schools alumni and an educator, and she's a children's book author, and she will be giving you some background on her and how she sort of got the idea for the children's book, as well as she will be reading her children's book to you. And then her illustrator of that children's book, DeMarcus Boone, who's also a DPS alumni, will be coming after her, as well as we have Jermaine Porter, who works with Dr. Kelvin Bullock in Equity Affairs, to talk about his We Are Kings program here in Durham Public Schools. And my personal friends, Leonardo and Zwelly Williams, Chef Zwelly Williams, to come and talk to you about their adventure of becoming entrepreneurs and owners of Zwelly's Durham. And then my colleague, Kelly Stevens, will be here with you, and Jordan Snyder from Everfi, to talk about the social studies standards and the new options of materials available for these social studies classes. We have an exciting lineup scheduled for you guys, and we do hope you'll come back and be with us each Wednesday at 1 p.m. And currently, I would like to turn it back over to Executive Director of K-12 Curriculum and Instruction, Chanel Sidbury.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you, Drs. Bullock, for that wonderful discussion. I think it is very important for us to reflect and think about how we got here, what we want our future to look like, and we can't aspire to be if we don't know what we have been and what we have gone through. So another opportunity that we're going to be affording our families alongside of our Black History Month series is we will be doing a digital viewing streaming of The Best of Enemies. And The Best of Enemies is a true story of the unlikely relationship between Ann Atwater, an outspoken civil rights activist here in Durham, and C.P. Ellis, a local Ku Klux Klan leader. It is starring Taraji P. Henson, and it has is Durham's story about integrating and merging school systems. So I definitely want to afford this opportunity to all of our families. We will be doing a free live streaming of The Best of Enemies beginning on Friday, February 26th, and you will have an opportunity to view that at home for 72 hours. So families and students, if you're interested in that opportunity, make sure that you contact your school principal. You can learn more details about that. This film is rated PG-13, so it will be streamed and available in our secondary schools. So we want to make sure that you have access, but we want to make sure it's also appropriate and age appropriate. So that will be available for middle schools and high school students. So please take advantage of that opportunity and ask about that at your school so that you can make sure that you get those links, and we will continuously remind you. Next slide. Again, as we wrap up here, we thank you. We want to make sure that we provide a space to have a continuous conversation about all cultures, but in particular this month, Black History and Black Heritage Month. We want you to engage with us based on our conversation today with Drs. Bullock and also with this panel. We want to hear from you. What is your dream for Black history in Durham? You can, and we want you to use our hashtag shown on the screen, DPS Beyond28, because we celebrate Black history beyond the 28 days of February. So respond to this prompt. What is your dream for Black history in Durham? You can add me at DPS_K12C_I, or you can add Melissa Perez, which her handle is there, as well as Kelly Stevens, her handle is also there. So you can add any of us, but most importantly, we want you to use the DPS Beyond28 hashtag so we can follow along, respond, and like your post. Thank you for viewing us today. We're going to have a continuous conversation. Please do join us next week. As we are having more opportunities. Again, if you were unable to view this live, this is also going to be available on our YouTube channel. We want to thank our leadership of Dr. Pascal Mabinga, our illustrious superintendent, as well as our board and leaders for all making sure that we promote and make sure that we show cultural diversity and that we honor the perspectives of all learners and all students in Durham Public Schools. We thank you for indulging us. We want to continue the conversation, and remember, celebrate Black history, DPS Beyond 28. Thank you and have a great day.